Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will be part 4 of an ongoing series talking about compliance settings in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's discussion will turn the corner, start going a little bit more in detail, a lot more in detail, about how the components work, how they set themselves up. Anytime I have a discussion like this, just always ask the question out loud, why are we talking about these things, right? Why do we need to know these things? And the answer is that in some cases may not be necessary to know as much detail as this. Certainly supporting the product, you could run into some places where detail at this level is very important to know. However, knowing how the products work or the product components work is very pivotal to understanding the flow of events, things that could happen, things that could go wrong, and so on, right? So that's why we do this, discussion. Okay, so there's most of this session is going to be, frankly, in demo. In fact, the two demos you see up here that I'm going to do, talking about CI baseline deployment and then also database operations, I'm going to combine those as I go through the overall demo, right? But first, before we get there, just want to talk to you about the flow. Oh, by the way, on the topic of why do this as well, right? So compliance settings is one of those components that you may not actually use, but you actually are using it. You just may not know that you are, right? Compliance settings is the engine that many other things are built upon. So software updates is built upon the compliance setting engine. There are things other than that wrapped around software updates as well, but the base is compliance settings. The software application deployment feature is built on compliance settings. Other things around it for sure, but the base of it is compliance settings, some things in OSD as well. So certainly if you're using compliance settings, you'll need to know, at least hopefully want to know how these things work, right? But so the point of that is, if you understand this, it does translate across to other things that you might use maybe in more mainstream, right? All right, enough about that. Let's jump right in. So here is this is the only slide I have here besides the demo. And the point of this is just to kind of show the flow of events. This is server side. So the end of this presentation will be when we finally get policy prepared for clients to come retrieve and download, right? Pretty simple flow of events. Basically, we have the SMS provider. So any work you do in the admin console to create configuration items, to create baselines, whatever that is, that gets handled by the SMS provider and ultimately placed in the database, right? There's the next component in line called SMS DBMon, and one of its primary jobs is to watch for changes in the database and then notify components downstream of further work to do, right? And then you'll notice that the objects below, OBJ, REPL Manager, Policy Provider, and HMAN, those are the three components that actually do the work of making sure policy is ready, the clients have what they need, and so on. That's really the extent of processing. There's a lot that goes on there. So another point I want to make here. So this diagram assumes a standalone primary site, and that's what I'm going to use in the demos. If instead you have a hierarchy and you start with the CAS and roll downstream to these other primary sites, not all of these components will be located on your CAS, right? Certainly SMS Prov will be, SMS DBMon will be, but since the CAS has no clients, you won't have OBJ, REPL Manager, or Policy Provider. Those will receive notifications whenever Config Manager SQL replication works and drops the metadata down on the primary, right? HBAN too. Okay. Although HBAN is on the CAS. All right. So some key points here. Just that's mentioning the hierarchy, standalone, primary processing difference. The key database table, there's really two. The starting one is CI underscore configuration items. There's also a CI underscore assignments, and you'll see both of those pretty clearly as we go along. All right, well, enough of that. Let's move right into the demo. All right, so let me pull in the lab. Actually, I think I just said the OBJ REPL Manager is not on a CAS. That's wrong. It actually is. Policy Provider is the one that's not on the CAS, because that's a primary site only component. All right, here's the lab, and what I have here, I don't have any baselines created yet. I'm going to do that here. Let me go ahead and maximize this. I do have a CI created. So the point of this is not to show you how to create baselines and configuration items. I already did that in the first part of this series. The point more here is to show you what happens when some of these actions take place. So there's two things I'm going to do here. First, I'm going to create a baseline that will tie this configuration item in to the baseline, but that baseline, when I create it, will not be deployed yet. The second thing I'm going to do is actually deploy that baseline, and I'm going to repeat this process the same way for both times. So what I'm going to do here, so I can have strict control over what's happening in my environment, is I'm going to go disable some components. I would caution against doing this in production because it can cause some issues, but my lab is fine, and so I'll go ahead and do this. It should be fine if you are careful in what you're doing, but not ever really a good idea to do in production unless it's really, really needed. All right, so what I'm going to do is rename 3 components. I'm going to rename obj REPL manager to .old, rename hman to hman.old, rename policy provider, there we go, to policy provider.old, and then I'm going to stop the executive. It may take a second, and then I'll start it again. And once I get it restarted, then those 3 threads will actually be non-functional, right? They won't be loaded into RAM. And so I can do some work in the console and watch what happens and see the flag files that get triggered and so on, right? So that's what I'm going to do here, and then I'll create the baseline. All right, cool. So let's start that back. Okay, so I have this configuration item. Now I'm just going to go create a baseline. And I mentioned that in the first pass of processing is handled by SMS provider. Anything that we do in the console is translated into the operations that need to happen using SMS provider. So if I go in here to logs and go down to SMS prov, right here, go down. All right, open that up proactively, and we'll see what happens. All right. So let me go ahead and create my baseline. So I'm going to call it test, and I'm actually going to work through a couple of these items, find the one, because everything I'm clicking on, everything I'm doing really is causing an update against the database, right? So I added that in, and so now I'm going to pause just for a second to give the provider time to have a little bit of a gap in processing time. So that's good enough, and then I'm going to hit OK. And so this is going to actually go commit that information to the database, right? Well, how do you know that? Well, whenever you're looking at any kind of logs, first of all, very busy sites can be hard to trace, right? To really get a handle on what's going on requires kind of reading through the logs in maybe a lab environment like this one where you can actually see what's happening and the timing. So here's where I had given the break. Here's where processing picks up, right? So a lot of noise here. You can get into maybe some tangent areas depending on your familiarity with reading the logs, but there's also good information here. So first of all, we see that we're working with configuration items because we see this method. We're going to put an instance of a configuration item. That means we're going to write that into the database, right? And then we're committing that and so on. We're rolling on. We see some various information, right, as we roll. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but as we go through this, we'll see certain indicators like CI ID. We'll actually hold on to that because we'll see this exact ID again. So the point of me showing it to you here is there's actually a couple of different places that you can get the ID as we go along. This is one. This is as the operations are happening against the database. The other that I'll show you in a minute is after the operations have happened to the database. Either way, good to know. And we could go on down and read more stuff about what happened, and we'll see the various SQL and WQL statements here. One point on the tangent, right? You're not going to see insert statements written out like a SQL statement or a WQL statement. Those inserts are done by methods that are in WMI. You saw put instance a minute ago. That's using a WMI method, right? And so don't get lost in the fact you don't see anything that's inserting here. It actually is inserting, but it's happening through method. Here's our CI ID again, and so on, right? So I'll leave it here. I'm not going to go line by line. This is really what I wanted to show you. So I'll park it here, roll up a bit, and so on, right? So this is inserting data to the database. We don't yet know, though it would be fairly easy to even figure out from here where that's getting inserted. I've already actually told you in the key tables it's CI_configuration items, but how do we know that, right? So the next component that picks up, the next thread that starts to run, is SMSDBmon. After we make these inserts to the database, SMSDBmon picks up and we can see it responding to those particular inserts. So here's SMSDBmon, right? So if you notice, again, let's kind of go by timestamp. Okay, here's a decent break, right? So if you notice, here we are noticing inserts. These inserts are happening on these key tables. I told you one of the key tables here is CI_configuration items. We're recording that the inserts have been seen on this table. SMSDBmon is aware of them, right? And then and there's an update as well. As a response to those inserts, SMSDBmon is going to react, right? Here's one on role-based access control that is important for all these changes that we make, right? But regardless, wherever we see the inserts, SMSDBmon is going to react. It's going to react by dropping further flag files. Okay. Notice it drops them in 3 areas: OBJ REPL Manager, Policy PV, and then hman, right? hman.box right here. Okay. So notice that SMSDBmon actually drops files into OBJ REPL Manager, Policy PV together, right? So that's why I had back on the diagram kind of an arrow that goes between OBJ REPL Manager and Policy PV. There's actually interchange between these two components as processing happens. All right, and so notice also the file name of these files, right? All of them end in CIN. So CI notification, configuration item notification is the extension, but the file name matches the specific configuration item ID, right? Well, why does that matter, right? Why do you care to know the configuration item ID? Well, so let me pull in the database demo here, okay? And these are some queries that I had up here, so I'll just use them and substitute with this number, 167.82.617. Okay, so 617. And so we'll just walk through these, right? And so the reason you want to know these is because the CI_configuration items table is a really big table, right? Typically, software updates will be the biggest thing that you have in this table. And so if you try to just simply run a select against CI configuration items and sort out your data, you're going to be struggling because there's so much here. Now in my lab, there's not a ton. There's 5,000 rows. In production environments, it's not uncommon to have millions of rows in this table, right? So if I know the specific ID, it's going to help me hone in pretty quickly on the specific item that I'm interested in. And so sure enough, here we see the configuration item that was added, right? How do I know it's the configuration item that was added? Well, certainly you see in the logs, right? But even here in the CI unique ID column, we see indicators of what it was. So I created a baseline. Here you see the name baseline inside the definition of the unique ID identifier, right? So, and you'll see there can be different flags that are associated here with the CI unique ID to tell us what it is. There are a number of different things that could actually be stored in this table that you'll see in just a sec, right? So, not going to get off in the details. There's a lot of tables over here. Just let me go up here to show you. Here are all of the different CI tables, right? Lots and lots and lots of them in a relational database. This is one of the key ones, right? And other tables are referenced that have certain identifying information by this one, and then we branch out just like a relational database. Uh, CIs are essentially metadata, right? And the metadata will describe certain configurations that need to be present, don't need to be present, whatever that is. There's this definition. There's also a component called a model definition that is referenced here that we could go down and find in the database tables. There's versions here. The SDM package digest is interesting because the model, SDM, whatever, kind of refer to the same thing. The digest is going to show us a very abbreviated form of the bigger definition. So if I click on this, I can see what specifically my ID is, the scope ID, the logical name. This is just that CI unique ID kind of separated, right? We can see the ID of the particular configuration item on this baseline. So here I know this is a baseline. Here I know the configuration item on the baseline is here, and such, right? Anyway, won't dig too much into that because we can spend a lot of time on it. Typically, you don't need to be at this level, but it's interesting nonetheless to be at this level and to see, right? Moving on over, notice the CI type ID 2. There are a number of different types that can exist in this table, as mentioned. So if I run this query, we'll see CI type of 2 is a baseline. If you see 1, it's software updates, and all these other kinds of definitions, right, can be in this table. Okay? And so knowing the type will help you know what is there. All right. So let me go back up here. All right, so scrolling over, that's really all we're going to spend a lot of time on. Date created, date modified, who was the last person to modify it. Sometimes that's an interesting piece to know who created it, whatever. You can get all that through status messages too, but this is another source for you. If you know what the CI is and you're not wanting to sift through the status messages and so on, you can come here. And different detail. The owning site, right? So it's possible in some situations maybe that a configuration item was defined at a site other than one that is currently in the hierarchy, right? So maybe you defined a configuration item at a given site and then remove that site from the infrastructure, but yet those definitions still remain because they've replicated. Could be that that you have a different owning site, right? You could validate whether that's the case here. No real way to change it other than manually, and would recommend caution here. The only reason I bring it up is there is a tool in the resource kit that allows changing the owner of a particular application and such. I don't believe that it works with configuration items like compliance settings and such, but that's the reason, is if sites get out of sync, source sites and so on, updating and such, the ownership is important to be able to work on those things. Anyway, big tangent. All right, so we'll move on past that. We'll come back to the other things in just a minute. So what's happened is, again, I've parked some of these notification files into the various inboxes. And I've disabled the threads of those particular components so they cannot process. But let's go look at those inboxes and see what that overall processing looks like. So let me actually open up and go back a level. Go to inboxes. We have 3. We have HMAN, right up here. Here we have a couple of different things. Here's our RBC. So there's an RBAC control file. It's empty, right? It's just a flag to wake HMAN up to tell it to do some stuff. All right, then we can go back to policy PV, or sorry, let's do OBJ manager since it's next in line. Okay, here. We have a CIN, configuration item notification, again empty, just tells OBJ repo manager to wake up and do some things. And then we have policy PV, which has a CIT, again the same CI name, nothing under this one, right? So let's take a little bit of time, maybe a little bit tedious here, but let's open up one component at a time. So okay, so we'll rename that one and then restart executive. and let the processing for that one component work. All right, stop. So let's go restart it. Okay, get the cursor in the right place. Start it. So OBJ REPL Manager should kick in. Let's go back to inboxes, and once we see the files disappear from here, which shouldn't take too long, the one file, then we can go back and see what happened, right? Okay, so that's gone. So first of all, before we go anywhere else, let's go back and inventory the other inboxes real fast and see if there's any change. No change here, HMAN, and then looking for policy provider to see if there's any change here, right? Policy provider, nothing specific here, right? Okay, so just keep track of that because that's the way we figure out actually how different things work, right? Well, let's go back into the logs and we'll see what happened. So in OBJ REPL Manager, if we look at that, we'll see that it processed that one configuration item notification file. Okay, so we're going to follow the timestamps. Should be fairly easy here because we've been paused for so long. There we go, it just jumped. Right, so we're starting SMS Object Replication Manager. All right, and we're just looking for some different things. You'll see in just a second that here we did receive the baseline information. We're processing that. We're then deleting the notification file, the CIN, and doing for any kind of targeting, right? This is not deployed, so we see that. It's not a targeted CI, and so processing basically wraps up at that point. That's all there is to do, right? Well, similarly, I'm going to go back and start the other components now. Okay. And do the same cycle, and then we'll check out what happens over there. All right, so stopped. Let's restart it. There we go. And then we'll just watch the processing of these other components. Let's go to policy provider. There's a lot of activity oftentimes in policy provider that is hard to kind of sort through, but we'll see what we get here. All right, again, going by the timestamp, we see that it just kicked in. It's doing its thing. See a lot of work that it's doing. All right, so I'll pause it here. Actually, let me let it go here. All right, pause it back. And then we're going to go up and watch the timestamp, right? There we go. So there's a nice break right here. Okay, so we started it again right there, and then waking it up, looking for some different things. Not a lot of excitement here because we don't have anything really deployed. There's no policy to really change. There's no collection changes. There's no member changes. You see where the processing of that happens. There's no targeting of anything, right? But we do go through the motions. You'll see that again whenever we do the deployment and so on, right? So just a lot of different things. Won't spend a lot of time here, right? So all right, good enough. So that's that. And then for HMAN, just go to that real quick. HMAN is going to process this from the perspective of role-based access, right? So if I scroll up a little bit, I'll see the natural break in the log here, right about here. So we're starting up the HMAN thread that's going down right there, right? And so then we'll see the flag file come in here in just a minute. Doing a little bit of house cleaning here. See if we get down to it. All right, let's see. Actually, so not a lot of excitement in this log yet. We'll come back to it, right? So the next part of this is to go back and disable all these components again. Helps if I type. All right, and so we will restart the executive and start it back up. All right, so let's start it back. All right, good enough. So we're off and running there. And so these threads are now disabled. Pardon me. And so let's go now and create. I'm going to move these down. We'll come back to them. Here's hman, policy PV, get rid of you, and obj REPL manager, right? Get rid of all of these, in fact. So now I am going to go and deploy this particular baseline. All right, so let's go do that. Very easy. I'm just going to choose the always preferred all systems collection. Just kidding. In my lab, that's okay. In production, please don't do that. All right. So it's going through the motions. I won't go to the prov log because you've seen the prov log. Actually, let's see. Let's see. That's SMSDBmon. Here's provider. We can take a quick look at it and see different CIs that we're going to work on. You can see it placing the deployment and so on. Actually, let me not spend the time on that. You can go through it on your own if you like. Here is dbmon, right? And so dbmon wakes up just like it did, but notice this time it is receiving an insert, noticing the insert on CI assignments. It does not have an insert on CI_configuration items. Why? Because we've already created the configuration items. In this case, the configuration item is the configuration item that we built. You didn't see me do that. That was already in place before we started. The second configuration item was the baseline, which is itself a configuration item as shown. And then now we just need to associate that configuration item to the specific collection and so on that we need to target. So that's happening. That's mapped in CI_CI assignments. Okay, so we notice that, and then we will react by dropping files in hman box. Here's that again. Here's our obj manager, and it's a different extension, CIA, CI assignment, an ID for that CI assignment. Here's an add, right, file that's dropped in, so we're adding that CI assignment, and so on. Here's that drop in. Where did policy provider go? I don't think we have it in policy provider yet, but we'll free that up in just a minute, right? So we'll go look at the database real quick. So what is the ID? 167.248, right? So if we look at CI assignments, then we should be able to see that ID. And here it is, 248. Here's the assignment unique ID. We know that it's the test baseline targeted to all systems. That's kind of the format. Baseline name _ collection name. If we didn't know that, then we could go find the target collection ID. This is the unique ID of all systems, and so on, right? There's lots of good information here. Now, having this in this table, having this detail in this table does not do anything in terms of creating the assignment. This is just mapping and saying where the assignment is recorded, where the association is. So it's good to know that this is here. This has to be here in order for the assignments to take place. But the actual work of creating the policy and so on for the machines to pick up is done by other components. All right, so let's go look at that, and we'll come back to the database in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. 248 we know, and so on. All right, so let's just go make a tour of our inboxes real quick. So back up. Okay. And if we go to, let's just go in order, hman. Here's our RBC file. There's a couple of them here that's waiting to process. If we go down to obj manager, here's our CIA file and the add. They're both flag files. All right. If we go down to policy PV, we have nothing and we have nothing, right? So let's go through this same exercise and let's start these components in order. Okay, so we'll start with OBJManager. All right. And we'll go through the cycle of stopping and restarting. And we'll see what happens. And we'll start it back up. All right. There we go. All right, let's watch and we'll see when those files disappear from OBJ manager box. In fact, we'll pull open this log and we'll go to the bottom. Okay. And good enough. Looks like it has done its thing. Let's make sure. Yeah, those files are gone. Good enough. So let's start to the beginning of the processing loop. So right here. All right. So we're going to go through and look at the various things that we saw a minute ago, but this time we'll see that we do actually have some work to do, some assignments to make. So we found the CIA file, the add file. We find that here's the CI assignment, has one targeted CI, right? Here's the policy ID that we have associated with the assignment, all right, which you can come back to. We'll see that again in a minute. And go on down, right? Here's the assigned CIs, begin processing the assigned CIs, and reference CIs and different things, right? And we just move on through. Policy ID, and so on, right? And then ultimately we're done, okay? Well, we just started policy PV. I'm sorry, OBJMgr. We didn't start policy PV. So if we go back to policy PV, we will see that OBJ REPL Manager has actually placed some detail in here, specifically in the policy target eval. So now there's a pack file. This pack file will wake up policy provider to say, oh, there's some work I need to do to create some policies. Let me go do that, right? Until now, we've done the work to make an association and such in some of the policy tables, but the actual assignment piece hasn't happened, right? In fact, if we go over to the policy assignment table, let's just do a select star from here. If I can grab that first character, there we go, last character. So we can roll on down and see all the different policy assignments, okay? And see the different times that things have been added and so on, right? If we go back to our OBJ REPL Manager log, let's see. Search up for policy. Policy ID, that's not what I'm looking for. Where to go? Now, let me do this. That's what I wanted, I believe. Let's see. CI assignment. Okay, sorry, that I was getting confused. This is actually the CI assignment ID out of the CI tables. Sorry, that hasn't been created yet. That will be created whenever we actually open up policy PV. So let's start up policy PV. And go back through this this cycle. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and start HMAN2. And that way we'll be done. All right, and let's start it back. All right, so policy PV should go process these things. That's the last time that I'm going to have to restart the executive, at least in this discussion, right? And so here, if we watch, that's hierarchy manager. All right, so we can wait for this guy. So hierarchy manager is not really exciting. It's just going to be looking for different RBAC things and so on as we process through. So not a huge part of this in terms of creating policy and so on, right? So I won't spend time there. But policy PV is, that's dbmon, don't need that. Did I close policy PV? Nope, there it is. Okay, good. So if I scroll scroll up, oh, this is pause. That's what's going on. Cool. So we'll roll on down here, let it do its thing, and go up to the timestamp break. There it was. All right. So roll on down here. So scan tool CRC, looking for different things. A lot of noise here, like I said. Oh, I went way too far, didn't I? Sorry. This looks like it still hasn't kicked in yet. Let's see. Maybe it did. Hang on a minute. Let me find it all. There we go. I see it now. I see what I was looking for. I'll just go down to right where I wanted. Hang on a minute. So ultimately, we're going to process this thing, and we will end up processing the pack file. Okay. So here we see PADBID, the policy assignment database ID. Policy assignment database ID right here is empty. There's nothing in it. But we can go to the policy table and find that. We will in a minute. Right? And then we'll see that we are processing this pack file, or have processed the pack file, and so on. Right? So at this stage, we're building the collections and such. It looks like the same kind of logging, but we're actually having some work to do here to actually associate the collections. Right? So we'll PADBID 179612. Let's go find that. Let's see. Just copy and paste it out of here. That's interesting. Okay. So we're not going to be able to tell a whole lot here. We'll be able to see the policy assignment ID. We'll be able to see the PADBID, and we'll be able to see that kind of information. We won't be able to see details of the policy body and things of that nature, right? We'll be able to see that this is in fact the baseline that we created. Here's the policy ID. If you look back to the beginning of this when we were talking about in the database, in fact, let me do that real quick. 394, that's the baseline. And if I just execute against this again, we'll see that it's the same exact ID, 394, blah, 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 right? So we are talking about the same thing. All right. And then once we process it all, we should have entries in the policy collection map table that indicates kind of how we're targeting this. So if I go execute this, looks like that wasn't created. Actually, did I get the right policy ID? Let me make sure. Hang on a sec. All right, so I got into a problem because of the way I'm actually starting and stopping threads, I think, in my lab. So I went back and recreated my deployment. This time I just chose to go to the all users collection to do something different. And now I have what I want. So here, processing any pending policy assignment change notifications in policy PV log, working through this, building any kind of notification files, collection changes, whatever, deleting another flag file here that indicates we're finished working with it, also finally deleting our pack file, right? And so if I look, here's my PADBID ID. Let me actually search up for that again. Actually, I don't need to, I don't think. Let me see. So I'll work backwards this time. So here is the entry that was added to my policy assignments table. I just did a select against the whole thing. I don't have very many things. this was added just recently. It's against target collection ID of 3, which is all users, which is who I targeted. Here's my pad bid. So if I go up here and look at it now, it'll be there. Okay, good enough. And that's really it. I mean, we can tell again that things are kind of lined up and ready to go and such. And now when the client comes to pick up the policy, it will have something to actually get, right? So one comment about these components. So the OBJ REPL manager is pivotal in getting the work of creation of policy and mapping to collections and different things done, right? If that part doesn't work, then the policy provider will never function. I mention that only because OBJ REPL manager may not be one of those components that comes to mind when you think about this, but it's very pivotal, right? And so if you ever are working to try to understand how a component actually works, a really good way to do it is like I do. Whenever I start looking at some of these things, I don't know how they work either. I have to figure out, especially some of the new components that I haven't worked with before, how they work, right? So a trick that I do and recommended several times in videos like this is just to go through and take whatever action you're going to take, right? The way I do it is I will get walk through the point in the console right before I hit OK to commit a configuration, and then give it a little bit of time so the logs are easier to read. And then once I'm done with that, I'll go in and select the logs that I know would be involved, or you can even select every single log here. Take a little bit of time to load for sure, but then merge those files together, and you'll see a lot of good information. Let me just show you with I think I'm in the wrong path. Nope, I'm good. Let me just show you with some of the ones we've looked at today. Okay. So we've looked at SMS prov. So let me go get that. Be a bit noisy here, but I'll still show to illustrate prov. And then we have SMS dbmon. SMS dbmon, where are you? There we are. Okay, dbmon. We have policy provider. We have REPL manager, or I'm sorry, OBJ REPL manager there, and we have HMAN. So I know what components are involved, so I can just select them and hit open, and Trace will merge those logs together. So I can watch the timestamp, see what moves between what in terms of data passing between components and different things. We're not going to go through this log any more than just to show it, but just to give you an idea. As you scroll through, policy provider will be there, and we'll see other components show up as well. Move on down through this. Yeah, there you saw OBJ REPL manager and so on. So you can get a really good idea, dbmon, what's going on and the times that they happen just by measuring it out that way. All right, so we will end this session here today. Next time, in the next session, we're going to kind of pick up where this left off and start on the client side where it goes and pulls the policy, pulls it down to implement it, and show how that works.